Hello, hello. This is Joanna speaking, and I should say, welcome back after a long pause. It's the 28th of October, 2025, and a couple of days ago, I realized that it's been a year since I recorded my last podcast episode. Why that is, what's new with me, and what I brought for you today in terms of learning English. Well, this is the content of today's podcast, and hopefully you won't wait another year after that for the next one. So, first of all, it's been a year because I wanted it to be perfect. I wanted each and every single episode to be absolutely flawless. And that's not possible, right? That's not the best approach to anything in life, probably. But why I decided to return, it's not that suddenly this episode and all the next ones are going to be perfect. It's because I was inspired by some other podcast, or rather by a person, by a host of this podcast. So I read a book. And I came across this book by accident. I mean, I have heard about this title for quite some time from a couple of people that I know online or in person. And then I came across this book at the airport when I was traveling internationally. And I thought, okay, since it was positioned as a bestseller, I thought, okay, this is the sign. I have to buy it. And I did. And I always find it more pleasant to read a paperback version of a book rather than an ebook on my Kindle. So I grabbed it and I started reading it. And it really, really inspired me, especially that I realized that the author of the book runs his own podcast. And the book is The Diary of a CEO. And the name of the podcast is exactly the same. You can find it on Spotify, YouTube, whenever you want, basically. And I realized that this guy, Steve Bartlett, has recorded already something like over 700 episodes, but I started listening to them from the end. So I started with the oldest ones that came from 2017. Currently, I'm listening to episodes from 2018. And it's absolutely amazing to see how he developed over time, because the book was written in a completely different time than the first episodes of the podcast. Anyway, it inspired me to return to my own podcast. And here I am. Now, what's new with me? It's not that I have been slacking, or that I was slacking for the past year, because I wasn't. I was pretty busy developing my English weekly course. I actually organized my first language weekends. The first one took place in October in Warsaw. The next one is going to take place in November in Poznan. It's the 14th to 16th of November. So if you're lucky enough while listening to it, you may still have a chance of securing your own spot at this language weekend. I truly believe that this is an amazing experience for learners, because we immerse totally into English. It's 100% time during coffee breaks, lunch, dinner, playing board games, which we do happily in the evenings. You just get to experience English really, really fully, like together with all those natural reactions, short questions, and everything that goes along real situations, real life situations. I've also visited the United States, which I think will be the topic of another episode of my podcast, because I have visited a couple of new states. My prime location, the most important destination of this American trip in September this year, was Montana, because I was inspired so much by the series Yellowstone. But more about Montana, whether I liked it or not, and how I liked in Yellowstone National Park and all the other parks that we visited, because we mainly focus on new parks that we have never been to before. And what is actually the biggest highlight for me from this trip, which is something absolutely surprising because I didn't see that coming. I will tell you more maybe in the next episode, if not the next one, then maybe in some closer than more distant future. I can promise you that. But now I wanted you to know a bunch of very useful idioms that are actually related to this episode, which is starting from scratch. I'm not actually starting from scratch myself, because I've already created 6 episodes of my podcast last year. You can still listen to them. But it feels like this. I mean, the pause was so long that I feel like I'm starting from scratch. So starting from scratch is in Polish simply zaczynać od zera. It's just like that. So you can say I feel like I'm starting from scratch, but that's okay. So that's exactly about me. You can also say a clean slate or a blank slate, which is like a new chapter. So this podcast feels like a clean slate for me, like a completely new chapter, like tabula rasa in Latin, something like that. The next one is probably to turn over a new leaf, which is start something anew, like have a different approach to something, begin doing something in a different way. For example, I'm turning over a new leaf and leaving perfectionism behind. You could also say, which is like one of my favorite, very colloquial expressions, but still pretty nice one, to pick up where I left off. So that would be in Polish something like zacząć tam, gdzie się skończyło. So I picked it up in October last year, in October 2024, because this is where I left off. Okay. The next one could be I'm back to square one, which is related to the board games I mentioned before, because if you return or if you are back to square one, it means that you are on square one, which is just the very beginning of any board game, right? You could, for example, say, at some point, I realized I was back to square one, overthinking everything. When it comes to starting over or starting again or starting from scratch, you could also talk about certain, let's say, downside or disadvantages of perfectionism at certain obstacles that come along. So you could also say that you get caught up in something, which is Polish for za bardzo się skupić, zatracić się w czymś. Okay? I got caught up in trying to make every episode perfect. That's, again, my context. You could also say that you are overthinking things. They're thinking too much about something. So I was overthinking every sentence, every pause, every intro. Or I could also say I was chasing perfection, which is not the best thing for progress, right? You could also say, when it comes to the brighter side of the situation, so to inspire or to motivate yourself, because remember that motivation can be external and internal. You can say that you are lighting a fire under someone. So you are starting up, you are, let's say, triggering, you are the booster for motivation for someone. So that podcast really lit a fire under me. To lit a fire under someone is Polish for rozpalić motywację w kimś, something like that. My second favorite from this episode, when it comes to expressions and idioms, is to strike a chord. To strike a chord is Polish for poruszyć coś w kimś. So, for example, his book really struck a chord with me. Remember that strike is irregular. It's an irregular verb. And that's why I say struck. his book really struck a chord with me. So when something moves you, when you find something really emotional and you are not indifferent to it, you can say to strike a chord. Well, probably the next one could be used to talk about the book I mentioned before, so The Diary of a CEO, because this book gave me a kick, which is like Polish kop do działania. It's like listening to those early episodes of the podcast gave me a real kick to start again. And by the way, talking about this podcast again, The Diary of a CEO, if I was ever to choose like a British native speaker whose voice I would like to have in terms of the accent, the vibe, the tone, the rhythm, the quality, all those things, I would definitely put Steve Bartlett in my top 5 people whose accent I would like to have. Like particularly, like everything that he says is just music to my ears. His English is absolutely gorgeous. If you don't like the topic of this podcast, because I can imagine that not everyone listens to business podcasts or self-development podcasts, just give him a chance and just listen a part of it to take a, I wanted to say to take a look. Well, to just drop by and listen to his voice. I mean, to listen to his accent. It's absolutely perfect. And the last one I have for you for today is to come full circus, which is like Polish for zatoczyć koło, or perhaps again be back to square one, but with a fresh new perspective. So I could say, I've come full circle back to podcasting, but well, with a slightly different new mindset. Yeah, so these are the idioms. You can find the transcript as well as the vocabulary list in the description of the podcast. The link to the website is there. I would really, really appreciate your comments or sharing this podcast, or just following me on YouTube or Spotify, leaving a review. That will be very, very valuable for me. Let's start over together. I truly hope that you liked it. Thank you very much for listening. I'm truly excited for this new chapter. This is what I can also call it. And until next time, speak to you soon. Ciao, ciao.